Tonight we'll drift through 6 simple dishes, each one a quiet comfort from a kitchen past. Some came from seaside cafes, others from humble staff rooms or early morning bakeries, but all of them in their own way are soft steps toward rest. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let the warmth of familiar flavors guide you gently towards sleep. The first recipe tonight is baked rice pudding, with nutmeg and a crusty top. There are some recipes that feel like they belong to the night. They don't make sense in the noise of the day. Too slow, too plain, too still. But come evening, when the lights are low and the kitchen has gone quiet, they make themselves known again. I first made baked rice pudding by accident, or rather by exhaustion. I was young then, still full of ambition, still believing every dessert had to have flair and height and sauce dragged across the plate. Just so. But late one shift, the pastry oven was still holding a low heat after service, and I'd been left to finish the closing duties alone. It was winter, cold enough to see your breath in the alley outside. I found myself pouring milk into an old roasting tin. Full fat, generous. Then came the sugar, just enough to make it feel like dessert, not breakfast. A handful of pudding rice, and without thinking, a whisper of ground nutmeg across the surface. I slipped it into the back of the oven and forgot about it. No timer, no garnish, no plan, just milk and rice and heat and time. An hour later, I opened the door, and there it was, golden around the edges, wobbly in the middle, with a skin forming on top that looked like the kind of old-world dessert you only see in village cookbooks. I took a spoon to it, while still in my whites, sat on a milk crate by the back door, and tasted something I'd never been taught in culinary school. Quiet comfort. Since then, it's become my ritual. Not always at work, sometimes at home, sometimes just for me. Always when the day feels long. Always when the world has asked a bit too much. Here's how I make it now. Slowly, like a conversation. I start with a baking dish. Shallow enough to get a good surface, but deep enough to hold the swell of the rice. Into it goes a liter of whole milk. Not skim, not light. Milk with weight, with memory. Then half a cup of pudding rice. It doesn't look like much, but it grows. That's the lesson. Add about 1/3 of a cup of sugar. White, simple, the kind that disappears into creaminess. A pinch of salt, because even sweetness needs grounding. A splash of vanilla, if I've got it. And then the nutmeg, freshly grated, if I'm awake enough, jarred if I'm not. Just enough to scent the top, like old Christmas paper. I stir it gently. No need to whisk, just enough to nudge the sugar from the bottom and settle the grains. Then I dot the surface with little flecks of butter, maybe a tablespoon in total. They melt into golden spots as it bakes, like candle wax sinking into linen. The oven should be low, around 300 degrees Fahrenheit, or 150 degrees Celsius. Slow heat, the kind that doesn't ask for attention. I place the dish on the middle rack and let it go. An hour, sometimes longer. I check it once, maybe twice, not to stir, but to witness. The rice softens, the milk thickens, the top begins to tan and wrinkle like old parchment. That's when I know it's close. When I take it out, I don't serve it straight away. That's not what this dish is for. I let it sit on the counter, steam rising, the crust firming. It's never perfect, and that's the point. The edges catch slightly, the skin pulls tight, and beneath it all is something pillowy, warm and gentle. I scoop it with a big spoon, never slicing. It lands in the bowl, with a quiet weight. The top is chewy, almost caramelized. The center is soft, creamy, and still just holding its shape. If I'm feeling indulgent, I pour a little cold cream around the side, just enough to whisper contrast. But most nights, I eat it as it is. It doesn't look like much. It's not the kind of dessert you bring out for guests, but it has something most don't. Patience. A kind of warmth that doesn't rush you, doesn't demand anything clever, just rice, and milk, and time. So if tonight you need to feel grounded, or still, or quietly understood, put the kettle on. Warm the oven low, and make this, stir gently. Don't watch too closely. Let it become what it's meant to be. And as you sit there with your bowl of pudding, still wearing the day on your shoulders, let the warmth remind you, not everything good needs to be complicated. Some things just need to be left alone, to become themselves. Sleep well, and let the quiet carry you. Good night. That was recipe 1. The second recipe tonight is apple crumble with oats and brown sugar. There's a kind of dessert that never appears on the menu but is always remembered. It shows up at the end of long shifts, in staff rooms, on chipped plates, balanced on tired knees. Not designed for elegance or display, just meant to be eaten. Slowly, gratefully. Apple crumble was that for us. When I was posted in a quiet country hotel in the Cotswolds, the sort with uneven floors and views that turned golden in the evening light, there wasn't much fuss in the kitchen. Just good work, done right. We cooked for weddings, garden lunches, estate owners, passing hikers. The head chef was strict about mains, picky about sauces, but when it came to the staff meals, he always said, give them something warm, something sweet. The rest will sort itself. So the crumble became our ritual. At the end of prep, we'd have a bin of apple peels and cores, bruised fruit, no longer polite enough for the dining room. We'd pick through the lot, salvaging what we could. If you were lucky, you'd catch a few firm Bramleys or russets, just turning soft at the edges. These were the backbone. Not too sweet, not too crisp. The kind of apple that gave up its shape, just enough in the heat. We'd peel them with whatever paring knife hadn't gone missing, and cut them into thick slices, some uneven, some elegant, into a deep dish. They went. No weighing, just filling it, until it felt like enough. Then came the sugar, a mix of white and brown, if you had both. Brown only if the budget was tight. A spoon or two of flour to catch the juice. A squeeze of lemon if the apples were leaning too sweet. And always, always, a bit of cinnamon. Not sprinkled, but tossed gently through the fruit, until everything was kissed with it. You could smell it when you walked past the pastry section, like memory baked into air. Now the topping. That was the best part. It started with cold butter, cut into cubes, and dropped into a bowl, with plain flour. We'd rub it between our fingers until the mixture looked like damp sand. Then came the oats. Big, old-fashioned ones from the breakfast shelf, poured in without ceremony. The brown sugar followed, enough to sweeten, but not smother. We didn't melt anything. We didn't fuss, just worked the mix, until it clumped here and there. Some fine, some chunky. That's what made the top so good. Texture, crunch, character. We'd scatter the crumble over the fruit, never packing it down. The butter would do the work in the oven, a sprinkle more sugar over the top, for the crunch. Sometimes, if there was leftover cream from the morning scones, we'd set it aside to pour over later. But often, we ate it plain, straight from the tray with bent spoons. Into the oven it would go around 180 degrees Celsius or 350 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take. No timers needed. We could tell when it was ready by the smell. First came the caramel, sugar meeting apple juice. Then the oats toasting, the butter melting through the flour. And finally, that crisp edge of cinnamon clinging to the crust. When it came out, bubbling at the corners, golden on top, the kitchen always went quiet for a moment. The kind of hush that only comes when something good is nearby. We'd serve it in bowls, whatever was clean. No garnish, no fuss, just fruit and topping and warmth. And we always asked for seconds. I still make it now, not every night, but on the ones that feel like they've asked a bit too much. When I'm peeling apples alone and need the smell of something steady, I make the topping in the same way, by feel, not rule. I let the apples soften in the oven until they sigh into each other. And when I spoon it out, I remember those country kitchens. The tired jokes, the clatter of boots, the quiet joy of a hot dessert after a long day. Crumble doesn't judge. It doesn't dazzle. It just waits in the oven until you're ready for it. A spoonful of sweetness, a crunch of honesty, a dish made of what's left, turned into something more. So if the day has left you bruised at the edges, if you've got just enough in your pantry, and a little time before bed, make this, peel the apples, rub the butter, trust the oats, let the oven carry it the rest of the way. And when it's done, spoon it into a bowl. No rules, no need for perfect slices. Just the sound of soft fruit and toasted topping, and the kind of warmth that comes not from sugar, but from care. Eat slowly, sleep well. Let the crumble remind you, enough is sometimes more than plenty. Good night. That was recipe 2. The third recipe tonight is tray-baked chocolate sponge with a thin cocoa glaze. The first cake I ever learned wasn't anything extravagant. No towering layers, no piping bags, just a tray-baked chocolate sponge, baked in a tin we used for everything from lasagne to roast veg, topped with a simple glaze that barely crusted over when cooled. But it's the one that stayed with me. My mum taught me. I must have been 7 or 8, just tall enough to see over the counter if I stood on the kitchen stool. She didn't call it a recipe. She called it something to keep your hands busy and your heart warm. I remember the way the light hit the flour dust in the air, the way she moved around the kitchen, soft, unhurried. She'd measure the ingredients by eye and experience, not by scales. I always wanted to rush ahead, but she'd say, not too fast. That's how cakes sulk. We started with the basics, butter and sugar, creamed together until pale and fluffy. That part took patience. She used a wooden spoon, and I'd help hold the bowl steady. I'd ask why we didn't just throw it all in at once, and she'd tap the spoon gently on the edge of the bowl and say, because baking is a kind of listening. Once the butter and sugar sang together, her words not mine, we'd add the eggs, one at a time. She'd crack them with the confidence only a mother of 4 could have, always wiping the shell bits away with a flick of her finger. I got to stir, slowly. She taught me how to bring it all together without splitting the batter, folding in the flour gently, like tucking in a blanket. The cocoa powder came last, dark, unsweetened, the kind that stained your fingers and smelt like something more grown up than it tasted. A touch of milk, just to loosen things. And then the batter was ready, thick, glossy, and already smelling of something good. She'd grease the tray with the paper from the butter wrapper, no waste in our house, and pour the batter in, smoothing it out with the back of a spoon. I'd always try to sneak a lick. She never stopped me, just handed me the bowl once the tray was in the oven, and warned me, don't open the door too soon. It's like waking a child too early. They won't rise right after. And so I waited, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the oven, watching through the little window as the batter puffed and cracked, becoming sponge. That wait was its own ritual. The smell filled the kitchen, warmth, cocoa, sugar turning golden around the edges. By the time it was ready, I knew the cake by heart. Once it cooled, never before, she'd make the glaze. Just icing, sugar, cocoa, and a splash of boiling water or coffee, if it was around. Stirred until smooth and poured thinly over the top. Not thick like frosting, just enough to sheen the surface, set with a soft crackle when you bit into it. Sometimes she'd sprinkle coconut on top, other times, nothing at all. The cake was cut into squares, each one the size of her palm, and handed out to neighbors, school friends, or just whoever had popped in for tea. It was humble, but it never disappointed. Years later, in the deepest corners of professional kitchens, surrounded by mousses and spun sugar and layers, so precise they needed rulers, I'd find myself craving that tray bake. I'd make it in the staff oven, usually late, when the last cover had been cleared, and the only light was the one above the dish pit. I'd scale the ingredients then, I suppose, but I still stirred slowly. I still waited by the oven. I still heard her voice, clear as anything. Don't open the door too soon. Here's how I do it now, when I want to feel that same steady calm. Cream together 175 grams of soft butter and 175 grams of caster sugar until pale. Add 3 large eggs, one at a time, mixing gently after each. Fold in 150 grams of self-raising flour, 25 grams of good cocoa powder, and just enough milk, maybe 2 tablespoons, to loosen it into a thick, smooth batter. Pour it into a lined tray-baked tin, roughly 8 × 12 inches, at 170 degrees Celsius or 340 degrees Fahrenheit, for 25 to 30 minutes, or until it springs back to the touch and the skewer comes out clean. Let it cool completely in the tin. For the glaze, stir together 100 grams of icing sugar and 20 grams of cocoa powder with a few tablespoons of hot water. Just enough to make a smooth, pourable glaze. Spread it thinly over the top and let it set. Then slice into squares. Eat warm or room temp, with tea or milk, alone or shared. I make it now for my niece. She likes the corners best, crisp with the most chocolate. And as I hand her the spoon to lick clean, I see my mum in her, in me, in the quiet ease of making something simple, something whole. So if tonight calls for comfort, not ceremony, bake this. Cream the butter, stir the cocoa, wait by the oven, but not with impatience. Let the tray bake rise in its own time. Then slice, serve, and sit somewhere soft. Sweet dreams don't need frosting, just warmth, memory, and a bit of cocoa to carry you through. Sleep well. Good night. That was recipe 3. The 4th recipe tonight is baked bananas with honey, cinnamon, and a dash of rum. A West Indian chef I once worked with, strong hands, soft voice, used to call this poor man's brulee. He'd make it in the quiet of closing hours, when the kitchen had stopped yelling and only murmured with leftover heat. Never wrote it down, never timed it. He said, "You don't need a recipe, just ripeness, warmth, and something sweet to carry it." The first time he made it, I was exhausted. We'd just finished a punishing Friday night service in a brasserie where desserts usually meant towers of sugar and spun sugar. Garnish so delicate, we held our breath just plating them. But this night, as the lights dimmed and the floor crew wiped their last tables, he pulled a few bananas from the prep box, freckled, soft, the kind that would have been binned by morning. He sliced them in half, lengthwise, with the kind of reverence most chefs reserved for foie gras. "The fruit's ready," he said. "It's waited all day to be sweet." In a shallow dish, he laid them face up, nothing fussy, just ripe bananas, their insides pale gold and already starting to soften at the edges. Then came a slow drizzle of honey, dark Caribbean stuff that moved like syrup in winter. He didn't measure, only poured until each banana glistened. Next, cinnamon, not sprinkled in haste, but pinched between his fingers and held above the tray for a moment before letting it fall. "Let it rain," he said with a smile. And it did, dusting the fruit like evening light falling through shutters. Then the dash of rum, dark, aromatic, with notes of molasses and smoke. He used only a splash, but the scent of it rose up like memory, sharp and rich. "Not for the fire," he said, "for the finish." He slid the tray into the oven, already cooling from the evening's roasting, but still warm enough to coax the sugars out. No timer, no stress. We stood by the open pass and talked about nothing in particular. The scent grew slowly, banana caramelizing, honey thickening, cinnamon blooming in the heat. The rum mellowed into the mix, and the kitchen, so full of noise just an hour before, settled into stillness. After about 15 minutes, maybe less, he pulled them out. The bananas had darkened around the edges, just enough to wrinkle. The honey bubbled low in the tray, golden and syrupy. You want the fruit to soften, not collapse, he said. It should hold itself like a memory. We ate them in mismatched bowls. No garnish, no fork, just spoons. The skin still clung to the underside, but the flesh had gone satin smooth, tasting like it had been kissed by fire. Sweet, warm, spiced, but never heavy. I remember thinking, this is what dessert feels like, when no one's trying to impress anyone. Now, years later, I still make it when the house is quiet and the fruit bowl's gone soft with time. Here's how I do it. Take 2 or 3 ripe bananas, fully yellow, even freckled with black. Slice them lengthwise, keeping the halves intact. Lay them cut side up in a baking dish, something snug enough that the syrup doesn't run too thin. Drizzle with a tablespoon or 2 of honey, darker varieties if you have them, or even maple syrup in a pinch. Dust over a generous pinch of ground cinnamon, not a trace, a proper dusting. Then pour over a dash, no more than a tablespoon of dark rum. You can skip it, of course, but if you don't, that edge of warmth will thank you. And if the mood strikes, add a sliver of butter to melt into the base, just a touch. Bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 175 degrees Celsius for about 12-15 minutes, until the bananas begin to slump, just slightly, and the honey bubbles at the corners. Don't let them brown too much. You want softness, not scorched sugar. Serve warm. Spoon the syrup from the bottom over the top, letting it coat each curve. I sometimes pair it with a spoonful of Greek yogurt or a scoop of vanilla ice cream if it's summer. But mostly, I let the fruit do the talking. This isn't a showstopper. It's not meant to be. It's the kind of dessert you make when the world's been loud, when your heart feels frayed, or when the night calls for something warm and certain. A little sweet, a little spicy, quietly indulgent. So if tonight finds you weary, or simply in need of something that asks nothing and gives plenty, bake a few bananas. Let the honey run slow. Let the cinnamon fall like dusk. Let the oven do the rest. And when you sit down, spoon in hand, know that you've made something with care. No flourish, no fanfare, just fruit, heat, and a touch of rum to carry you gently into sleep. Good night. Good night. That was recipe 4. The 5th recipe tonight is jam tartlets with ready-made pastry. At the first bistro I worked in, a cramped place off a cobbled back street, with steam always on the windows and the smell of time never quite leaving your clothes. We made these tartlets on slow afternoons, the kind of days when lunch service ended early, the rush passed us by, and the kitchen leaned into its own exhale. That's when someone would reach for the jam jar. We used ready-made pastry, always. Not because we didn't know how to make our own, but because sometimes comfort should come without too much effort. The pastry came in sheets, stacked in the walk-in, cool to the touch, and just pliable enough after a few minutes on the counter. We'd cut rounds with the bottom of a ramekin or the rim of a teacup, pressing the dough into shallow tins without fuss. Sometimes it tore. We pressed it back together. No one minded. Then the jam. There was never a rule about what kind. Apricot, raspberry, black currant. Whatever was left from breakfast, really. We'd take a spoon, just one, and try not to overfill the cases. We always did, though. The jam would bubble up as it baked, sometimes overflow, leave a little sugary scorch at the edge of the tin. But no one ever said a word. That was part of the charm. Imperfection wrapped in pastry. I remember one afternoon especially, rain falling sideways outside, the radio low, the smell of stock simmering on the back burner. The head chef, usually clipped and brisk, sat down with us at the prep table. No speech, no announcement, just reached for a tartlet and took a bite. Crumbs fell to his apron. A streak of jam caught his sleeve. He looked up, blinked slowly, and said, "You don't need fireworks, just fruit and patience." That line stayed with me. So now, when the evening calls for something gentle, here's how I make them. I start with store-bought short crust pastry, chilled, not frozen. Roll it lightly on a floured board if needed, just to soften it. I cut out rounds, around 3 inches wide, and nestle them into a muffin tin or a tartlet tray. No need to grease it. There's enough butter in the pastry to let go when the time comes. Then I take a teaspoon of jam, only a teaspoon. That's the rule you remember after the first batch. Raspberries my go-to, tangy deep red, with seeds that crack gently between your teeth. I spoon it right into the center of each pastry case, trying not to smear the sides. But if I do, so be it. They're for comfort, not company. Sometimes I add a touch more. Half a walnut, a sliver of almond, a few tiny twists of orange zest if I'm feeling thoughtful. But mostly I let the jam speak. They bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 175 degrees Celsius for about 15-18 minutes, until the pastry edges turn golden and the jam bubbles gently in the middle, darkening like evening skies. You want the tops to shine and the smell to tell you they're ready before any timer does. And when they're out, let them sit. That's the secret. Jam straight from the oven is molten, eager to bite back, but 10 minutes later, they're warm and forgiving. A balance of crisp shell and soft, sticky heart. Sweet, but never loud. I eat mine with tea, usually. A mug held in both hands, the tartlet resting on a saucer that's seen better days. Sometimes I sit by the window, sometimes at the counter with the light low. The taste always brings me back to that bistro, to those quiet afternoons, to the feeling that even in a kitchen full of noise and knives, you could still find small sweet things that asked nothing of you but a bite. So if tonight calls for something simple and soothing, lay out the pastry, spoon the jam, and bake a little joy into the edges. Let it bubble, let it overflow. Let the tartlets remind you that not everything needs fixing. Some things are beautiful even when they spill over. Good night. That was recipe 5. The 6th recipe tonight is peach and yogurt cake. Single bowl, no fuss. There was a Greek prep cook I worked with years ago. His name was Nikos, soft-spoken and always humming something under his breath, usually rebetiko ballads that sounded like Salt and Sea and Homesick Sundays. He wasn't flashy in the kitchen. His mise was never picture perfect. His knives were old. But the man could coax soul from an onion and confidence from a broken sauce. And one quiet afternoon, he taught me this cake. We had finished lunch service early and had time to spare. The main had gone cold too fast, and the diners thinned quicker than usual. Nikos wiped down his board, looked at me, and said, "You know what this shift needs? A spoon cake." I raised an eyebrow. He just smiled and reached for a bowl. "One bowl," he said, tapping its rim like it was sacred. "No butter, just yogurt. You don't need to fuss if your ingredients are honest." He started with 3 eggs, cracked directly into the bowl. No separating, no whisking first. Then he added a generous scoop of full-fat Greek yogurt, so thick it nearly held shape. He measured in his own way, by sound and texture, not spoons. A swirl of sugar followed, white, but not too much. Peaches are sweet. The cake shouldn't compete, he said. Then came a glug of oil, olive oil. Not extra virgin, just something mellow and golden that knew how to carry warmth. He added flour by feel, but I've since learned it's about 1.5 cups, give or take. With a pinch of baking powder and the zest of half a lemon grated straight over the bowl, its perfume opening into the air like a sigh. He stirred with a wooden spoon, no mixer, no rush. It came together slowly, thick and pale, smelling of dairy and citrus and patience. Then he sliced the peaches, 2 of them, soft but still structured, not peeled. He liked the color of the skin, said it gave the cake memory. The slices went right on top after he poured the batter into a tin, greased with a touch of oil and lined loosely with parchment. Some sunk slightly, some stayed proud on the surface. "That's fine," he shrugged. "They'll find their place in the oven." He baked it low and slow, about 325 degrees Fahrenheit or 160 degrees Celsius, for nearly 45 minutes. And as it baked, the kitchen shifted. The radio softened. The dishwasher clinked quietly. That little cake, made without ceremony, filled the room with the scent of golden edges, sugar, and stone fruit, and a whisper of lemon. When it came out, he didn't glaze it, didn't dress it, just let it cool in the tin, and served it still warm, spooned from the edge. It was soft, almost like a pudding, at the center. The peaches had gone jammy, the yogurt made it tender, and the olive oil gave it a richness that wasn't heavy. "It's not dessert," he said, handing me a plate. "It's comfort," and it was. Now I make it on nights that ask for softness, when the day's been a little sharp at the edges, or when I want the oven to hum and the kitchen to smell like a story that ends well. 1 bowl, 3 eggs, yogurt, oil, sugar, flour, a pinch of powder, a scrape of zest, stir, pour, slice, bake. Nothing complicated, nothing clever. Just a cake that comes together the way good evenings should. Slowly, gently, without the need to impress. I eat it warm, often standing, with a spoon straight from the tin. And every time, I remember Nikos, his quiet smile, his old knives, and the way he taught me that food doesn't have to perform, it just has to arrive. So if tonight needs a little peace, try this. Make it in a single bowl. Don't rush. Let the peaches sink where they may. And when it's done, spoon yourself a bit of comfort. Let the sweetness settle in your chest. Let the yogurt do what butter cannot. And sleep, warm and full, like a kitchen that's already been cleaned. Good night. That was recipe 6. The 7th recipe tonight is baked custard cups with a bit of nutmeg on top. I make these when the world's been noisy. Not loud in the obvious way, but cluttered. Days when emails stack like dirty plates, and even the silence has edges. That's when I go for custard. Baked custard. To be precise. Simple. Slow, honest. The kind of food that doesn't shout or sparkle. It just settles. It's one of those recipes that barely asks anything of you. Just a few eggs, some milk, sugar, and time. And in return, it gives you a kind of hush that starts in the spoon and finds its way to your shoulders. I learned it from a mentor long ago, a quiet pastry chef who said, "If your nerves are fried, bake custard." He wasn't wrong. Here's how it goes, and how I still do it. More or less the same every time. I start with 4 eggs. Fresh, if I can. I crack them into a bowl and whisk them gently. Not with force, but like I'm drawing a blanket over them. Then comes the sugar. About 1/3 of a cup. Enough to sweeten, not to tip it into dessert territory. This isn't about indulgence. It's about comfort. In a saucepan, I heat 2 cups of whole milk. Slowly, no boiling, no bubbling. Just until it's warm enough that when you dip your finger in, it feels like a bath drawn for someone you love. If I'm feeling nostalgic, I add a splash of cream. Not much, just enough to whisper richness. Once the milk is warm, I pour it into the egg mixture slowly, whisking the whole time. This part is important. You don't want scrambled eggs. You want a smooth, golden blend that feels like dusk in a bowl. Then I strain it, always, through a sieve. It's an extra step, but worth it. It removes the bubbles and the occasional speck of egg white, and it makes the custard hum rather than mumble. Next, I pour it into ramekins, the old ceramic ones I've had for years. I place them in a roasting pan and fill it halfway with hot water. The bain-marie, as the French taught us. Steam and stillness, that's how you get the texture right. Silky, not rubbery. A pinch of nutmeg goes on top of each. Just a pinch, not grated in advance, but fresh off the nut, scraped gently, like you're waking a memory. Nutmeg should be smelled before tasted. That's the trick. Then into a low oven, they go. 300 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe 325 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're short on time, but I never rush them. They bake for about 30-40 minutes, until the custard is just set. You'll know it's ready when you jiggle a ramekin, and it wobbles like it's breathing. And then, this is important, I let them sit, just rest. Still in the water bath, still warm from the oven. The custard firms slightly, while the kitchen cools around it. That rest is part of the recipe, even if no book will say so. I eat one warm, never cold, with a spoon I keep just for soft dishes. I don't garnish it. I don't add a biscuit or a twist of anything clever. The top is just kissed with nutmeg, and beneath, the custard is barely firm, smooth, almost weightless. It tastes like nothing extravagant. And that's the point. It's not meant to dazzle, just to remind you that simplicity still holds space in the world, that you're allowed to be soft, that you don't have to perform all the time. Now I make these whenever I feel like the world is pressing too many buttons or pulling too many levers. I make them late at night, with the kitchen lamp on and the street outside quiet, and every time the act of whisking, steaming, waiting, it brings me back to center. So if tonight feels crowded, or heavy, or just too much, let the custard help. Warm the milk, crack the eggs, grate the nutmeg, pour it slowly, wait, let it jiggle, let it breathe, then take a spoon and rest. You're allowed to. Let the custard say what words can't. And sleep, quietly held. Good night. That was recipe 7. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep.